Welcome everybody to the Talent Management Institute's 2020 in review. Today we are speaking with Sean Cain, Director of Career and Performance at Walt Disney Television. Sean, thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Thanks, Lawrence. It's a pleasure, and it's so good to see you again. And of course, this has been a year to review, or maybe just to ignore entirely.
Yeah, one of the two. Well, let's start with the review. Let's dig in. I want to know, first of all, I want to start with you. So, as a senior leader, what have been your biggest challenges in working from home or working remotely?
I think this has been sort of the confluence of all of those things that have been pecking at the periphery for years: work-life balance and the workplace of the future, and how do we manage talent? And by hook or by crook, it's just been forced upon us. And so, for me personally, we're dealing with a newborn who came into the world in February, and juggling a 5-year-old, in the school situation. So on the home front, we're very, very busy. Working remotely, though, it was a challenge at first, if only because for my business in our industry, we're a very face first, people oriented business. And so it was a bit of a learning curve. But honestly, now, and I'm not sure if this might be the norm moving forward, but it feels as if most folks will be at least quasi remote moving forward.
Yeah, it's certainly been one of those years where, as you're saying, things have been kind of on the periphery, but now they're came to the forefront very quickly. So, what do you think? You kind of just mentioned it a little bit, but what do you think are some of the biggest changes that have happened this year in terms of talent management practices?
I can speak from our own purview in my company, Walt Disney Television, formerly Walt Disney Television, as of a few weeks ago. We're now Disney General Entertainment Content, which is a mouthful. So streaming is the future, I guess. And, speaking from the vantage point of my company and our business, we've really taken this year to reflect on the whole person, where we started the year with very clear business goals. Everyone had very solid commitments and ways to drive our business forward. And then March 13th, Friday the 13th, my wife won't let me forget, everything changed on a dime. And, I mentioned my company because Walt Disney Company is a behemoth in media, and I would think in business in general. And it would take something catastrophic to reset our entire business model. And that one Achilles heel happened to be something that kept humanity apart, away from our parks, away from our movie theaters. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So for us, it basically was an ICBM into our business model. We lost money for the first time in 20 to 30 years. We've laid off tens of thousands of people. And as a consequence, it's forced us to really revisit what it means to respect and keep talent. What's it going to take to prove to folks that we're a workplace of the future? How do you get the most out of folks? What's missing from our talent management equation here? And the long and short of it is business goals aren't as important right now. We're thinking more along the lines of, how do you feel? How can we really focus on your well-being? Used to work for the Jesuits or with the Jesuits at Loyola Marymount University here in Los Angeles. One of the phrases they toss around is cura personalis, care for the whole person. And I think our business has really sort of taken that on as a charge. And we're still working through that right now. We're figuring out how do we really revisit what it means to have a strong commitment setting moving forward.
Yeah. So what do you, to dig into that a little bit more, what are some things you're doing right now that maybe, for example, last year, December 2019, you weren't doing in terms of managing organizational talent?
Well, I'll go back to the idea of commitment setting, our business goals. Annually, typically in our second quarter, business leaders from around our company cascade their priorities, and then our employees are supposed to pick a few of those and make them their commitments and let those be the North Star moving forward. And to me, that's always felt a bit backwards. It always feels the person in service to the business. And, let's not have rose-colored glasses. We all work to drive an end for our business. And yet now more than ever, what people need to feel like is that they're cared about, that they matter, right? And so we've taken that model and tried to flip it on its head. Rather than leading with the business priority, we're leading with the personal priority. And so we're encouraging all of our employees to start their year with a really robust, reflective period on what are their career and professional aspirations. How can we really give that life? And using that as the North Star, then informing it with our business priorities, marry the two so that it feels like you're working for yourself in addition to the business, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense, I think. So, what, in terms of key motivating factors for a remote workforce, particularly during a pandemic? You've talked a lot about the caring for the people, right? But what are some of the key factors that you guys have found so far?
I think I wouldn't say there's one factor per se, or even a couple, but some of the bright, glaring objects that we have to avoid include, respecting what it means to be a parent, quote unquote, working from home, and broadening that definition to include, parents of fur babies, parents who are taking care of their parents, caregivers, right? And how do we navigate those traditional work boundaries? Um, and as I mentioned, it was a bit of a learning curve for our company, if only because this is a who you know business and it's very, FaceTime oriented. And now we're FaceTime oriented, right? Uh, and so I think, the big hurdle is one, respecting all the many obstacles that pull people away from their workspace. And two, this is something we discovered very early on, and there was some research back in April, was that working from home meant that people just basically eradicated their work-life boundaries if they had any. People were starting earlier and getting off later, and they were checking emails well into the early hours of the morning, and burnout was a very real thing, by late spring for us. Compound that with the fact that our company was hit pretty heavily with the pandemic and its after effects. And so we had to really focus on helping people establish solid boundaries, right? And it's been a very sort of give people rope year and hope that they don't do anything ill toward with it. But I think it's been eye opening to the extent that what they've seen, our employee base, is a measure of trust that perhaps wasn't given before. We're trying to look at it as an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, so you mentioned, and Disney is not unique in this, and furloughs and layoffs and all of the crazy things that have happened in 2020, right? So you're left with, the remaining workforce, and so many are fortunate to be in there. But how do you then reinvigorate that remaining workforce, right? Earlier, you mentioned, starting with the goals, but ultimately, without the rose-colored glasses, we all work towards the business ends, right? So how do you keep that alive in the employees while still focusing on, their health and well-being as well as the organizations?
Yeah, that's a solid question, and I really tried to inject a bit of empathy into the equation here, not as an executive per se, but as a person, basically just going through the same stressors that everyone else is. And ironically, maybe you felt this way at some point throughout this past year, but working remotely while being a blessing has made me miss the mundane connections of the office, the sounds of the
Yeah.
printer, the water cooler, the
Mm.
annoying coworker who just won't leave you alone. You miss that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the idea there is really, how can we get back some form of social capital? How can we get back to the science of us?
Mhm.
And so what we had placed previously on is sort of our 3 to 5 year plan, which was a really robust reinvention of mentoring
Mm.
and building solid relationships. That has been thrust into the limelight and really put front and center in our company. Not just for our segment, but our entire company, spanning all of our segments, parks, studios, and television. And we're really trying to figure out, and I think we've settled on a solution. How can we connect people in ways that we hadn't previously? So that despite all of the hurdles and the obstacles that we've faced as a company and as a humanity this past year, how can we really lean into each other and rebuild connections and make better connections than we had previously? So I think that's really how we're responding, right? That while we might be remote, we know that we need each other, and let's make that happen.
Yeah. That is certainly very important, and you're absolutely right. We're certainly not unique in that. I definitely miss the water cooler chat and the poking the heads in the office, and
Yeah,
the virtual equivalent of poking the head in the office is just not quite the same.
I know, right? The little
um,
hands on the video screen. It's like doesn't quite get it.
exactly. Well, we're nearing the end of the year here, right in the holiday season, a few days away from Christmas. Do you still feel that HR is still in crisis response mode, or has it stabilized some?
It feels as if we follow the virus, peaks and valleys.
Mm.
You know, by hook or by crook, whether it was coincidental or not. At the start of this next wave, this last wave rather, of the pandemic, particularly here in Los Angeles, where we are now the unofficial epicenter of the world, our company really faced a lot of serious decisions. And for the first time in some time, we laid off a good number of our folks. And to an extent, yeah, that's crisis. Rifts are always unpleasant, and it's never easy, particularly when you're in a very stable environment traditionally. Um, but I think our HR leadership has responded admirably, and not to sound Pollyanna-ish about this, but I feel like they're trying to find, the silver lining that crisis breeds opportunity, so to speak. And we're looking at it again as a way to facilitate better relationships, to revisit, what it means to work for our company from a person perspective, a talent management perspective. Case in point, the virus wasn't the only major endeavor that the country faced this year. We had mass protest and racial unrest, and our company, being sort of a vanguard of inclusivity, or at least as we thought we were, while also being a stalwart of our past, we found ourselves at a unique sort of crossroads to find ways to be more representative in our product, while also respecting our rich heritage. And so we've had a lot of town halls, a lot of very visceral, blunt conversations with our talent and our senior leadership. And it's quite frankly been uncomfortable, but a necessary uncomfortable, right? And thinking about how we can put product out there that looks like the world and people can see themselves. And I think our HR leadership has really taken that banner and run with it. I'm a nerd at heart. And you might have seen or might have heard recently, we had our investor day at Disney just a few days ago. And I'm a Star Wars junkie through and through. And there must have been 20 or 30, it felt like, shows in the queue for Lucasfilm. But one of our non-Star Wars properties from Lucasfilm was Willow, classic film starring Warwick Davis, a little person who becomes a great sorcerer. And I thought to myself, this is a wonderful way for us to demonstrate that we're living this idea of inclusivity without, shoving it down people's throats. And I think, again, in some small way, our HR leadership has had a part to play in that. You know.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's certainly great to hear. With our last question here, Sean, I want to know, for you, what has been your biggest learning in 2020?
It's always tough when they ask you to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
My broader function is in learning and development, talent solutions. And now more than ever, it's one of those times to realize that you can never stop learning. You can never get comfortable. Where even if you feel like for the past 90 odd years you're in a company that's not going anywhere, it can change literally overnight. And you've got to stay on your toes with respect to best practices. What are your colleagues doing? What are your competitors doing? Just yesterday, and it sounds like I'm, throwing BS at you, but I'm wondering to myself, in the science of us, social capital, it's rooted in psychology and human motivation. And I need to get my team to get me some white papers on, theory and sociology and motivation and all that stuff. You can never stop learning. You can never rest on your laurels. And that has been my biggest eye opener and learning of the year, I think.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Certainly one of those things that sometimes it takes a smacking you in the face, but the resiliency of us as a people, particularly in how we continue to learn and grow, is certainly pertinent even in the challenging times. So that's very great to hear. Well,
Yeah.
Sean, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, and hope you enjoy the rest of your holiday season.
Thanks so much, and apologies if you've heard my son crying outside. It's that whole work-life struggle, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those things, but no problems at all. And we thank you so much for your time.